All right, that brings us to the discussion item. This was the rezoning request for Landwind Properties, and I'm going to ask Mr. Solo. It's been a while, and this has gone through some changes, if he'll tell us about it.
Thank you. Yes, good evening. For those of you who may not remember, at the beginning of this year, Mayor and Council sent a request for a rezoning to the Planning Board. You then sent it to the Zoning Amendment Review Committee, or ZARC Committee. ZARC met twice to discuss the proposal, how best to address the proposal in terms of an ordinance form, and that led to a series of drafts, ordinances that they discussed. And what's coming to you tonight is that draft from ZARC. ZARC didn't endorse it. We had a meeting that got postponed, and we were hoping that we could finalize at least a recommendation to Mayor and Council by the end of the year so that they would then take it up. So what you have is a draft ordinance. I'm going to run through the ordinance for you. You have a packet. There's, I think, one or two memos from me, and there's a whole series of maps. I'm going to put the maps up on the screen, if we could turn on the screen, and give you a little bit of history and background as to how this all came about, and then if there aren't any questions on sort of the process and how this came about, we'll jump into the actual ordinance amendment. So in 2011, the applicant who's making this request submitted a subdivision application to create 20 lots on their property. Just give me a minute, and hopefully this will pop up. They wanted to put 20 lots on a 90.62 acre tract of land. The property is zoned R4, and at that time the municipality approached the developer and said maybe there's a better way we could develop this that wouldn't utilize as much land and would be much more environmentally friendly. All the maps that I'm going to show you have the same orientation, so I'm going to just take a break for a minute to show you. As I indicated, you can see the boundaries in black of the tract. It's 90 acres. It has frontage. Mount Lucas is to the west. That's along here as you're looking at the screen to the left. At the bottom of the map is Herringtown Road. Point out that Bunn Drive is right about here in the middle, and Herringtown is unimproved going to the left or to the west, and to the right and to the east it is improved. The Herringtown Lane, which has a series of single-family homes, is located to the east, right here where you can see the pointer. To the south, on the other side of Herringtown Road, is the Stonehill Church. To the north is Montgomery Township and the townhouse development known as Montgomery Woods. And again, to the east, you can see on the map, there are a series of single-family homes that are located and have frontage on Mount Lucas Road. The vast majority of the property is zoned RA or RB, and that requires a 4-acre lot or a 3-acre lot for this. The frontage along Mount Lucas is in the OR, or the Office Research Zone. The site itself is heavily wooded. There's a small area of wetlands associated with the stream, and we'll talk about that a little bit more, but just to point out, that stream runs right through here. You can see the black line running, and it runs diagonally through. There are some steep slopes in the center of the site. You can see that by where the contour lines get a little bit more detail. We'll have a more detailed map that shows you those. What's being shown on the maps in considered steep slopes are slopes that are 15% or greater. I do need to point out that by ordinance, you're allowed to build on a 15-degree slope. And when the slopes approach or are 25% or greater, it requires a variance. So the ordinance does not permit development on that, where it's 25. But what is shown on the maps that we'll talk about is from 15 to greater.
Wait, I'm sorry. Can you just explain what this gradients, does that mean 15% or more? Or
Yeah, when I get, there's another map I think that shows that better. I was just trying to give you a little history by putting up, this is a 20-lot subdivision. This was submitted in 2011. And just giving you the background that the southeast portion of the site is somewhat cleared and somewhat level. This original plan got modified when they came in. Staff reviewed it, and the importance of the as-of-right plan, and we'll call it the 20 lot, is that that sets the base density that when we talk about the cluster ordinance that builds from. Our cluster ordinance allows a density bonus based upon whatever the base density is.
But is that even if, I mean, are you discounting slopes? That's why I was wondering, because there was so
No,
many
you don't
slopes.
discount it. The way it works is if you can find a suitable building area to build your house, the lot counts. You can have wetlands, you can have steep slopes, you can have woodlands, you can have vernal pools, riparian rights on the property, but you need to be able to show to the zoning officer or the engineer that there's a buildable area on that lot. Because there's nothing wrong with the rear or the front being wetlands. There's something wrong if you can't find a buildable area, then we wouldn't count it.
And so you already went through and found buildable areas for each of the lots?
Well, we evaluated this one and came up with that there were some concerns, both in terms of whether or not a variance would be needed or if there was an environmental condition that would prohibit it. And change the view here. So the applicant submitted a revised plan, and that's this one. This has been reviewed by staff. We feel fairly confident that 20 lots could be created utilizing this plan. As you can see, they changed the road. The lot configurations are a little bit different. But in general, it complies. Realize at this point, and I'm showing you a whole series of maps, you're not being asked to approve the map. You're not being asked to approve a specific plan. These were all provided by the applicant to show you that there's a reasonable likelihood that what they want to propose and what you're seeing could be built, but things could change. They could come in tomorrow with a different 20-lot plan configuration, and we would have to review it as part of a subdivision plan.
But it seems like the 20%, the number of lots is a crucial assumption. That's right?
It is, but again, you're not approving that the developer, in this case, will be taking on whatever risk there is. If we find, when we go into a more detailed review and they submit a formal application that they only get 19, that's the base. At this point, from our review, we believe 20 lots is a reasonable number. So we're working with that assumption. The developer he's aware that if somebody wanted to challenge that, or if we found something that changed the condition. You may remember, Jenny, when ZARC was reviewing this, one of the issues was the wetland LOI, the letter of interpretation, was running out, and we wanted to know whether that was going to change. I'll talk about that, but they did get a updated LOI, letter of interpretation from NJDP. The wetlands did change a little bit. They did change, and we'll get into that, the 30-lot plan because of that. So, and things could change again. That's why I have to emphasize, you're not reviewing a set plan. You're reviewing what we're putting before you is a modification to the cluster ordinance. I'm getting a little bit ahead. That would apply in the municipality. I have to tell you, there's probably one other site, that's Yasna Polana, where this may also apply. But it seemed that when we talk about what it is we're doing, and in this case, I'm jumping ahead, but we're going to be, as you all know, we're providing a density bonus for affordable housing. That would apply to this site. It would apply to at least the one other site. There's possibility of some more if some of the educational institutions wanted to assemble because they have the acreage to do that. I don't think that's really likely. But this is an amendment to the cluster, so it would apply to other properties that meet. And when we talk about the ordinance, you'll see how we built in that there's only very few properties that it would apply to because we're doing this for the larger scale. And remember, we've always had a bonus, not always, but for many years given a bonus for clustering because in general, we, as a policy, prefer that where you can cluster and more tightly develop a site on the better or more environmentally suitable area and avoid the more environmentally sensitive. So it's a win-win, and we'll talk about how that all lays out as we get into it more. But I did want to share with you that through the ZARC process and through the wetlands, the 20-lot base did change, and we use that for calculating the density.
If I may, Lee, just because we're already on the subject, I just want to clarify, because this is part of the ordinance where it discusses how you calculate the gross density. It does not mention wetlands particularly. It mentions other unsuitable aspects. Are wetlands considered unsuitable for development?
They're not only unsuitable, but you can't build on wetlands or their buffer areas unless you do a buffer averaging plan. So that's why I've been focusing more on wetlands. You're correct. There are other critical features, floodplains, and the like. For this site, it seems that the steep slopes, and that would be 25% or greater, the stream, and its associated wetlands. And you can see on this map how they've modified a little bit, and you can see where the stream is running through. And there are some wetlands that are associated with the stream, and as you can see, there is a large area where a house could be placed on these lots. That's why we think there's a fairly high likelihood that the 20-lot subdivision is a reasonable assumption for the base density.
So the one last question I have is in terms of determining the unsuitable character of a lot, even if there's a buildable area somewhere on the lot, if you have to cross unsuitable terrain, either steep slope or wetlands, to access the suitable part of the lot, does that make that lot unsuitable? Or are you able to cross with a driveway or with some kind of construction the unsuitable portion of the lot?
We have not ruled that out because you can get a permit from the NJDEP to cross the stream for a driveway, so it would be subject to that. That's why I said when we look at it, we think there's a fairly high probability that they're going to get 20 lots. Okay, continuing on, just to remind you, the existing cluster ordinance provides for a density bonus for preserving open space, providing public access to the open space, and providing an active recreation. Those are the three criteria that are there, and it allows, depending on how much open space and active recreation you provide, what kind of bonus you would get. Then at the ZARC meeting, we talked about, well, what would happen if the developer just used our existing cluster as it stands? And they could get 27 lots, and I'd like to share that one with you as well. Bear with me. Make it a little bit larger. So this is their initial 27 lot that they could build as a right using the existing cluster. As you can see, the majority of the development is located in that southeast corner of the lot that we've talked about, where the land is most suitably done. The streams, are far removed. The steeper slopes are located in this general area. And then what they've shown you is how they would provide walking trails. Off of Mount Lucas, there's an active recreation area, and that they would then make that available to the public as well, so that they felt, in reviewing it, staff agreed, they would meet the criteria, at least at this level, to have a 27-lot cluster development under our existing. Now, when the applicant came to council, he said the existing cluster didn't really work for them, that the density in terms of a 4-acre larger lot and the smaller lot that you get with the cluster, but that they felt that they needed at least 30 lots in order to make this economically viable for them. And they also offered at that time to preserve over 60% of the site, and that they would dedicate 3 acres of future affordable housing to the town, for the town to decide what to do with on those 3 acres, but use it for affordable housing. And that they would increase the buffer, which is not shown on this as of right plan, from the 40 feet that's required in the cluster ordinance to 100 feet. In the beginning of this year, that was what they presented to mayor and council, who reviewed the proposal. In general, the council, in their minutes, say that the proposal was an effective way to preserve a portion of the Princeton Ridge, would place the development on the least environmentally sensitive lands, and would provide an opportunity for affordable housing, all things that they were supportive of. So they sent it to the board, and it went to ZARC. And as I indicated, we had 2 meetings. We discussed the site, we discussed the ordinance, we discussed, leave the map on, or the overhead on, because we're going to put some more maps up. And that they were going to review it. As I indicated at the last ZARC meeting, there was an issue that the wetlands was expiring. The wetlands have been reviewed by the state, and they've changed, and we now have a slightly revised cluster plan, which I'm going to put up in a moment and share with you, and we'll probably leave this one up. I think you all have a smaller copy of this as well, but I want to put it up on the screen so the public can see it. So now what you're seeing is in the yellowish tan color, they're showing you in the southeast corner the 30 lots that are clustered. All the way over on the left in the northwest corner, lot 31 becomes the affordable housing site that we're talking about. And they are showing, it's a little hard to read on this, but over 70% of the site, it will be preserved as open space. The darker green, where I'm running this little hand over, are the steep slopes, but they start at 15%. And you can see that they do impact some of the homes, but they're not the 25% that would be prohibited for development.
And I'm sorry, Lee, there are no 25% or greater slopes on this property?
There are a few, but they don't seem to prohibit any development.
But they're not
where a
shown
house
on
would be
the-
located. As you
They're not
look
shown
at
on the plan?
lots 23 and 25, it looks like they're in some steep slopes. They're in that 15 to 25 range. They did not map just the 25%. In general, and as a rule, we would discourage development in a 15 to 25%, but it's permitted. There have been other developments that have developed in that, but from a general planning point of view and probably from an engineering point of view, you want to avoid that. It's a lot more destructive to the site in order to build a house where there's a 15 or 10% slope. And so we're trying to stay out of that, but the ordinance only prohibits it where there's 25% slopes.
In terms of the standards for roadway design, is there a limit on the steepness of roadway design that's permitted in the town, in the municipality?
Yes, there is. Jack, do you have that
Yeah,
number?
I'm not sure what it is. I mean, it's typically in the maybe 12 to 15% range.
Right. Okay, so again, I'm asking relative to the gross calculation on the 20-lot plan. If there's a driveway shown crossing 20% slope areas that could be deemed not usable.
If it were at 25%, yes, but not 20, because
But I thought you said there's a limit on the steepness of
right, but you
roads.
can, obviously, they can change the grade to get that 15 or 12%,
Which is why we want to avoid the more steeply sloped portions.
just by changing the topography, you can get that flatter slope.
Within limits. I mean,
Within limits, but what the ordinance really says is it's that 25% that becomes the problematic one where you need a variance. If they needed a variance, I don't know if we would count necessarily the lots. But again, we felt fairly comfortable that the 20 lot seemed reasonable. We'll look at it closer. You're not being asked to approve this. We are not approving a 30 lot cluster tonight. Township committee, or excuse me, no longer the committee. Mayor and council are not approving a 30 lot cluster. They're going
I'm just
to-
trying to understand the ordinance.
Yeah. And again, as we said in the report, this plan is illustrative. It may not be what comes back, but it's there. It does obtain many of the original goals that we had when we started out, which was to place the development on the most environmentally suitable land. To preserve 60% of the site, we're at 74.4%. It provides 3 acres for a future affordable housing site, and it permits the 30 new residential lots that the developer indicated he needed in order to participate or to utilize this bonus feature. What I'd like to do, if there aren't any more questions on the site or the history, is turn to the ordinance. Mildred.
Lee, could I just ask, This is an active stream that's shown on here. It's not just a
Yes.
swale of some sort. And where does it start? Approximately the point where it crosses the driveway in? Or it has 2 or 3 sources up in that area?
Yeah, I'm not certain of the source itself. I just know that it runs diagonally through, and there are some wetlands. I haven't walked the entire length of the stream.
But the cluster shown would not encroach on this stream in any way, even at the headwaters?
I don't know, maybe the applicant can answer that when we get to them, but I don't believe that that's a problem.
I'm just, so I can have this in mind, offhand, what's Yasna Polana's zoning right now? Do you know?
2-acre zone, I believe.
2 acre?
So that's why I was saying there is one. I think if they were to develop it as 2-acre lots, it would probably get less than 100 units. So, I mean, there is, but again, it's the same thing. And you'll see when we talk about the site, you're preserving 60% of the site, you're getting a future affordable housing site, so there's a balancing I think you'll have to do, especially at the council meeting, in terms of the benefits and what we are trying to do. Because what ZARC ended up doing, and again, they didn't recommend the final ordinance, but at a staff level, we thought made most sense, is adding another criteria to the clustering, so that having the additional criteria for affordable housing seemed to fit in well with the recent discussions that we have on affordable housing, as well as longstanding goals in the master plan to seek innovative ways to provide affordable housing. And this truly is a unique way. You'll see when we talk about the ordinance, it says very little about the affordable housing zone, and it specifically says that's going to be determined later, what goes on there, whether it's 10 units or 20 units or 50 units. Some future council is going to have to decide that, and it will be based on a variety of reasons. But for our purposes, it wasn't part of the cluster. It was just the cluster is setting up, receiving the land.
Mr. Salt?
Yes.
At one of the earlier meetings, when the 3-acre site that was going to be designated as the affordable housing site, it was questionable whether or not that land was developable. Has that been determined yet? I know we're not going to discuss it, but did you...
We looked at it. It does have, towards the back, some wetlands. We put in standards specifically into the ordinance from some of the ZARC members had mentioned that it had to be environmentally suitable, and we define what that means, and it was, you'll see in the ordinance, it's 20% or less of the site could have wetlands or steep slopes. It has to, there's an existing structure on it. We put in that has to be removed, and a few other things. So we were building in, not only for this site, but any other site, if there is a developer who wants to take advantage of it, that the land we get is developable.
It's, in terms of the credit for affordable housing, is there some minimum size of the lot, the affordable housing lot, that's in the ordinance? I was looking for that.
It starts at a minimum of 1 acre, right? You get the bonus for above 1 acre. I think is how it's worded. Well, why don't I run through it, and maybe some of those questions will get answered. Because what we did is, again, we built on the existing ordinance, and what you have is a draft that goes back to August 3 of 2016. And we gave you the entire ordinance. Underlined is the new material. Anything that was being removed, we did in a strikeout. And the first page or two, minimal changes, changing township to municipality, adding that something on affordable housing. If you get to page 4 is the first substantive change. And if you look at G, we define affordable housing, which is the definition from COA, so that when we talk about affordable housing, everybody knows what it is we're talking about. And then the real standards begin at the bottom of page 4, but really flip over to page 5. It's 191.2B, which is the cluster density bonus. And there you'll see in item 4, we've changed it, and it reads now, residential clusters which dedicate suitable land for affordable housing, provided the municipal council agrees to accept said dedication. The dedicated land must have, and this would be the standards to ensure that the land is developable. First, sewer service, frontage on an existing or proposed road, and then no more than 20% in steep slopes, defined as slopes greater than 15%, wetlands, wetland buffers, wetland transition areas, as shown on an approved letter of interpretation, flood hazard areas, and riparian areas. And then finally, in 4, we added all structures should be removed and be free of any environmental hazards. So we think with those as safeguards, we're fairly assured that the site will be developable. The final check is obviously mayor and council have to accept or agree to accept the dedication.
So does this say that if the council chooses not to accept the property, the developer does not get or the applicant does not get the bonus?
That would be my interpretation.
That,
Because again, as the planning board, you can't speak for the council to say you have to accept it. We've had that come up with open space. Is it going to be public or private? And the condition is always you have to go to council and they'll make that decision. And then down below that, it talks about the density bonus. We added language that the housing units to be constructed in the dedicated affordable housing site are not subject to the provisions of the residential cluster. So that 3-acre will need its own zone. We just weren't prepared to tell you what that would be because there are a lot of factors that will go into that, a lot of that depending on where we are with our COA numbers and the like. And that will also be a mayor and council decision. So we're setting up what I think is a fairly innovative way to get an affordable housing site, and then we can over the next few years or longer, figure out how that will be developed. Then at the bottom,
it might be useful, just especially when the council comes to deciding this, to give us some kind of ballpark on how many units could be put there under which kind of development. I mean, obviously, it would be affordable housing is almost always multifamily.
right. It's hard to say, Jenny, because it depends on what type of development you want, if it's townhouses or apartments or a combination of the two. The development just to the north in Montgomery is at 7 units an acre, so let's use that as an example. So
That's the kind of thing I'm looking for.
yeah, you would have 21 units, and if you drive through Montgomery Woods, you can get a sense in terms of the density. Other places in town, Merriwick, Stanworth is at 14 units an acre, and if you did the math, so you're talking 42 units. So that's why I said it's hard to say how many, and we don't know whether you would want to do this as a 20% set-aside and sell the property to somebody. If the town wants to develop it or partner with some nonprofit and build 100% or 50% affordable. So there's a lot more work in figuring out what to do with the affordable units. What, from a staff perspective, was important was getting the land, because we often have trouble finding suitable sites to provide affordable housing. And typically with single-family development, all we get is a fee, and then we have this money, but we really don't have a site to expend it on. We use it for rehab or buying down mortgages, and we thought this is a pretty good way to acquire a future site for the community for affordable housing. If I could go on then, at the bottom of page 5 and spilling over to 6, it tells you what type of site you need to be eligible for this site. So you have to have a 75-acre tract. So if you had a 20-acre tract, you're not eligible for this. We're really gearing it to the few remaining very large parcels. We've increased the common open space to 70%, with 60% as preserved open space. Preserved meaning nothing's going on there. And then C, we set this new minimum buffer from the track line at 100 feet. The existing ordinance called for 40 feet, so this would more than double the setback all around. And then at the bottom of that paragraph, you'll see, and it's only 2 sentences, so I'll read it. The bonus for dedicating land for affordable housing shall be calculated as follows. For every 1 acre of land dedicated to the municipality for affordable housing in excess of 1 acre, the developer shall receive a 15% bonus for housing units in a conventional development. And then we go on to say the land dedication does not relieve the developer from paying the affordable housing fee. What that means is for the 30 single-family homes, they'll pay the existing fee that's charged for single-family residences for affordable housing. So the thought there was we would be generating some seed money to figure out what to do with the 3 acres, but it would go into the town's affordable housing trust fund as required under the COA. And then you'll see in the next paragraph at the bottom, and underline, if the developer qualifies for a bonus in more than one category, because often they do, the bonuses shall be cumulated but shall not exceed 50%. So again, using the 20 lot, in this case, that's why they can go to 30, and that would be capped. So if we had a larger site or a slightly smaller site, it's capped based on the base plan. So if you had a base plan with 30 units, they could build 45 if they meet or exceed all of the density bonuses. The rest of the ordinance remains unchanged. Again, we changed township engineer to municipal engineer and township to municipality. But that's really the meat of it. We felt the best way to address this request of increasing the number of units in the cluster ordinance was to provide this new category for affordable housing. It seemed to fit in well with our existing master plan and our housing element and our future plans, and then cap it at the 50% as well. So that's the ordinance in a nutshell. I'm sure we have some public that want to be here. I know Mr. Letizia is here. He's indicated if the board has questions for him, he'll answer them. What staff is looking for is for the board to decide whether, if you're comfortable with this ordinance or if you want to modify it in some way. But I think it's been about a year. We need to advise council what our thoughts are on whether or not we want to provide for a new form of development here. Gail, did you have a question?
Yeah. I missed the ZARC meeting. Did you discuss, on page 3, the multifamily structures being only a minimum of only 20%? It seems like that's something that might have changed, a feeling about multifamily. I know we were talking about in our zoning amendment, our zoning project about encouraging multifamily.
I don't think we really did, because again, we were really focusing in on this request and changing the bonus. We didn't really get into it. That would be a separate amendment.
I mean, multifamily are better for the environment, and they're.
It allows, it's a balancing act again, as most zoning and planning end up being. Most of the clustering is occurring in the larger lot areas in town, and I think that's why originally the 20% may have been put there. I don't know. It predates me. I'll date Alan, and I don't know, Alan, if you remember why, but I'm going to guess that because most of the areas in which clustering was occurring were larger lot zones, and I agree with you, Jenny. It may have made sense to provide variety of housing and to maybe allow to cluster a little bit tighter, which is what apartments or townhouses allow you to do. But it's being put in a residential area. And this is a perfect example. So if we had more, and they're not showing any townhouses, but if that's what they wanted to do, you'd be putting townhouses up against homes that are on 1 acre lots. Typically, that doesn't happen as often. But, it's something we could look at. But I think it's a larger question than just what was asking. And the applicant wasn't asking for it, so we didn't really stray beyond that.
And I guess just to add, this wasn't intended to be a review in gross of the existing cluster ordinance. Yes, sir. And in terms of multifamily, you're correct, there's 20%, but that, in addition, there's no limitation on townhouse development.
Oh, townhouses are not multifamily.
But, yeah, in that same section you were reading,
This is non-townhouse.
if it's both, then it's not a multifamily.
Any other questions? Jack, Derek?
I should point out and give thanks both to Jack and Derek and Alan were instrumental in helping me draft the ordinance as well as the ZARC committee. We got a lot of good input from them as well.
Oh, just one more thing. I just noticed about them on page 10, I know we were talking also in our zoning, in our project about the mounding, and I just wondered if you wanted to change that. I mean, because is that, or whatever you call it, where you're calculating the height, and so I thought it was the township that, either the borough or the township, one of them allowed you to like mound up dirt to make the building higher. Do you know what I'm talking about? And so on page 10, when it's talking about the height and how it's calculated, I don't know if that's the way that, if it says it's, where is it?
E.
Is that the way, does that allow you to build up dirt?
No more than you can currently do.
Well, what I'm saying is, which one is that the better way or the worse way to
This is probably more
calculate it?
restrictive than what we currently have because it gives a definite height. Many of the former township zones allow for a height to setback ratio, which also allows a taller height.
But I think, Jenny, this refers back to definitions in other sections of the ordinance. You can't really change to disallow the mounding here.
Oh,
You have
okay.
to do it, basically where the
Okay.
definition of
Okay, I just-
ground plane is.
Okay, forget it
We're
then.
working on that ordinance, so hopefully that'll be January,
Right, I just thought if
February.
it was an easy thing to just,
But I do have just one more. I just want to make sure I'm understanding the affordable housing credit correctly. So it's 15% for each acre above 1 acre. So you get a 15% credit for 2 acres and a 30% credit for 3 acres. I'm understanding that.
Cumulatively, you
Right.
can't exceed the 50%, right?
I understand that, but, it's relevant because I guess you could give 4 acres and then, get almost your 50% credit
No, it
without
can't
doing any of the other.
It can't exceed 30%
Okay,
for that one.
for that one credit, okay.
Okay, anything else? Tim, any ZARC comments? All right, let's see, Mr. Letitia, did you have something you wanted to add before we open it to the public?
Tom Letizia, attorney, Pepper Hamilton, representing Landwind Development. We're not prepared to make a presentation. We don't think it's really appropriate. This is a review of zoning, and it has been discussed for about a year now, various parties, with the ZARC twice, with council. We were actually before this board, if you recall, earlier in the year. And so we're really at a point now where we're hoping we can get a decision one way or the other. We realize we're not entitled to this. This is a request. It requires the council, the policymakers to decide whether this is a type of development that you want to encourage within the municipality, a development that we believe provides a number of community benefits that are really not realized currently under your cluster zoning. For example, just again, it's already been touched on, but just to emphasize, affordable housing. Currently, you really don't have anything like what's being proposed as part of this zoning amendment, where as long as you can, the developer is required to cluster, the municipality can be dedicated land for affordable housing. And if you've been following what's going on with affordable housing throughout the state, I think this is a timely piece of legislation to consider. Secondly, the amount of open space that is going to be provided as part of this development, much more than you would get under, clearly you won't get anything under a conventional plan, but if we came in with an as of right, we wouldn't have to provide as much as would under this plan. And then finally, because I know you're going to hear from some neighbors this evening, under this proposal, there is a 2.5 times greater perimeter buffer around the track than you would have under the as of right. So I think those are three key factors that hopefully you'll consider as you review this ordinance. And again, on behalf of my clients, we're hoping that at the end of the night, and hopefully it won't be the whole night because I have another client waiting in the wings on another application, that you would tell us one way or the other. We're at the point now we need to know what direction we're going to head in. Thank you.
Thank you.
I did have a question for our professionals. What the impact on infrastructure of cluster versus the as-of-right proposal?
The roads, the length of roads is shorter. So if you're dealing with, assuming that they're public roads, that snow plowing and just general maintenance over the years would be less.
And sewer connections would,
Well, sewer's separate.
Well, but yeah, I mean, they pay for each connection. I mean, as far as capacity, the difference between 20 units and 30 units is not significant. We don't have any issues with capacity in town, so that wouldn't really be an issue.
okay.
What about driveways and connections? I mean, with building, I guess, is it 30 units there, or is it 29? I keep forgetting. Versus 20. Are you saying the infrastructure is cheaper, even if it's 20
the public
versus 30?
infrastructure, which would be the streets,
Right.
is less.
So even though it's only 20, you think just because it's shorter, even though it's 30, the shorter but 30 houses are cheaper in the end than 20?
Not looking at the cost to build, but looking at the cost to maintain over the years. If you're maintaining, I don't know what the length is, but a half a mile of road versus a mile of road, obviously it's cheaper over time.
So, but the other things, once you build them, they're there. It's
Right,
not,
I mean, the developer's going to
savings.
build 30 driveways instead of 20 driveways,
Yeah,
whatever
so
the
it's
case
just the
may be.
road cost.
It's really the long-term maintenance of the
of
road.
the road. Okay.
Okay. There are no more questions. Let me open it to the public. Should remind everybody that we do have another application this evening, and could I see a show of hands, how many of you came to speak to this application?